Today is the day. Goodbye, Bones. I'll see you tomorrow. The Stanley Hotel, opened July 4th, 1909 and founded by Freeland Oscar Stanley in beautiful Estes Park. One of its largest claims to fame are the fact that this hotel inspired Stephen King to write The Shining, which would later be adapted into a movie by another Stanley, this time Kubrick. Although common misconception, but none of the sets you see in the famous movie are actually from the Stanley Hotel. They're mostly film sets, which makes sense, but sorry to disappoint. Ever since this large claim to fame, the Stanley has been known as the most haunted hotel in America. But if you're in the audience, you probably know this, because this story isn't about the Stanley. It's mostly about me. And if you don't know who me is quite yet, hi, I'm Taya Metzinger, and I set out to go to the Stanley for two distinct reasons. One, I've never been on a trip on my own before, and really I wanted to step into that responsibility as a challenge. And two, I just really like ghosts. Like ghosts, the supernatural, and death and the macabre in general. I've loved it ever since I was a kid. And I've also ingrained it into a lot of what I love, whether it's film, art, or writing. I just love spooky stuff. And the Stanley Hotel being a known tourist location that's very nearby and accessible in Colorado, where I currently live, and is known to be the most haunted hotel in America, I figured I would want to go there someday. So I decided that this would be the day. I invite you to join me as I recount my journey on how I almost didn't get to spend a night at the Stanley Hotel. Oh, yep, there it is. There it is. Look at that. It's so ominous. The Stanley. I arrived at the building on good time. In fact, I highly overestimated how long it would take me to get there, as indicated by this 2 o'clock bell that would ring as soon as I arrived. Do you hear that? That's amazing. So I had plenty of time to walk around before check-in, and first thoughts were excitement, but also, this is a really nice hotel. Honestly, at many points, I found myself forgetting that this place was supposed to be haunted, because honestly, if I didn't have that notion in my mind already, I wouldn't have known. I'm not one of those people that generally finds old stuff creepy. In fact, I really like it, which is just another part of the reason why I wanted to go here. But honestly, if not for the haunted factor, it really just is a nice place. I continued to walk around and just generally chill before finally the time came to check in. And I couldn't check in under my reservation because I was under 21. Yeah, that was a big oversight to only find out now. I suppose I just assumed because I was a legal adult that it was fine, but apparently it's not. I couldn't stay there under my reservation. And it was disappointing, to say the least. As far as I knew at that point, going home was the only option. And I had wasted so much time and resources to just basically be a tourist here at this beautiful place. Not only that, but it took so much courage for me to put this high effort idea out there and actually execute it. And now all of that courage was wasted because I had no significant result to show from all of that responsibility and effort because I could no longer stay there. But then, a light at the end of the tunnel appeared at the other end of a very tearful phone call. My dad. I had called him to initially tell him that my plans were over and I was going to have to come home, but then my dad, seeing my disappointment, offered to drive up there with me. With him present and also staying at the hotel, the reservation could be moved into his name, and I could stay. Shout out to my dad for doing that very spontaneously. I love my dad, and his presence really contributed to this journey and also comforted me. And also I wouldn't have been able to stay with the hotel without him. So shout out to my dad. And you could probably guess that the news that I could now stay was absolutely phenomenal news. But I was somehow still upset. Why? I'll tell you. Let me defend past Taya real quick. I think my goals were a little misplaced in my mind. I had put the goal of going somewhere by myself over the goal of the actual journey, which, in all honesty, looking back on it now, is not fair on myself. By setting this impossible barrier, my brain had somehow decided that now that I was not doing it on my own, I had failed. Which isn't true. I made it to a location. I set out to go somewhere and went there, with or without road bumps, with or without help. I was there. And I was too focused on the idea of this trip that I forgot to look around and see what I had already done. I was at the Stanley Hotel. I am so glad that I came to that realization eventually. I'm glad I can still stay and that this is going well. I'm glad. And this is turning out to be an amazing spring break, so I don't even care. I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. Once my dad arrived, we got everything sorted out, and I also had a conversation with him. He likes to travel a lot, so he had many stories to share where things have happened on trips and he's just had to roll with it. There will always be roadblocks, and there will always be people who are there to help me along the way. And just because things will fizzle out and not go the way that they are planned out to be, that does not mean in any sense that I have failed. It really just means that I am going through what every artist or anyone really goes through. And I think that is infinitely more meaningful, considering I was in such a different mindset to begin this journey, in the middle of this journey when I was dealing with this conflict. But it feels very nice now to say that I am so glad that I have failed. I feel like there's so much about this trip that is reminiscent of the artist's journey, as everything always looks different in our minds than it does when it finally reaches the paper. And that doesn't make us any less of an artist. In fact, it probably makes us more. And now, finally, we've come to the part of the video which you were probably most interested in to begin with, which is the part where we can talk about the spooky stuff and less my emotional journey going through this whole process. So it's now time for having fun at the Stanley Hotel, which I should have been doing honestly the entire time. This big blue room, I think, is a good segue to transition to the next part of the video, because now I should probably talk about our actual hotel room. Again, I was met with sort of the feeling that this room was strangely ordinary. It was honestly just a normal hotel room. You know, I was again just surprised of how normal everything about this hotel really felt, besides the fact that it's just kind of old and very fancy. Calling it the most haunted hotel in America, it really sets the stage for what you expect when you arrive there. And all media portrayal and TV shows would make it out to be this hotel that's decrepit and old, and there's ghosts everywhere you turn, and the staff totally leaves you to your own devices, and you have to be able to survive the night on your own because there is nothing but the spirits that await you on the other end of the doors. But really, during the day and during some of the night too, it really kind of just felt like a normal resort hotel, which was fine because it was still nice. I wasn't disappointed, obviously. But the only really scary thing about the architecture itself was the hallways. But all hallways can be creepy when you have yellow lighting like that. And the basement, sort of, but also just mostly the tunnels. I'll talk more about the tunnels later, but yeah, there's like a system of tunnels underneath and around the Stanley Hotel. But that's only a small portion of the hotel, so overall, it just felt really nice to stay. About the blue light, that is because they had projections of blue light on the building. It really just felt like I was like on a set or something where they needed some supernatural blue light, and it was honestly kind of cool. Kudos to you, Stanley Hotel, for shining that blue light through our window and giving me some very aesthetic pictures to take home. So after I touched down at my very blue room, I went on a tour, which unfortunately doesn't allow any recording, which is fine because it does allow photography, and I captured a lot of photos and I heard about a bunch of cool stories. They had a concert hall which was built by Freeland Stanley as a gift to his wife, who played the piano and always wanted to perform concert piano. However, back then they didn't really allow women to perform on stages, so he created his own concert hall. And turns out the first time that his wife Flora ever tried to perform on that stage in front of their friends and family only, she went up to Freeland and said, "Hey, I'm not doing that ever again. I just figured out I have enormous stage fright." So if that's a testimony to things never going exactly the way you planned, I feel like that is. It's been happening ever since the 1900s. But don't worry, that concert hall has been used ever since and is still currently being used for some performances. Ghosts that often reside in there are Flora herself, who is often seen in a white gown and is often associated with the smell of rose perfume. Freeland, who is often seen up on the balcony, I'm assuming where he would have watched Flora play in his past life. And an electrician who turns on and off the lights of the stage. I forgot the name of that particular ghost. It started with an E. Is maybe Edward or something. Edward apparently flickers on and off lights fairly often, and you know, good for him for still carrying out his electrician duties in the afterlife. I hope he's getting paid well. We then adjourned down into the basement where we saw several other rooms. We also got a first taste of the tunnels where they had put a trash bag with a fake skeleton in it, which didn't scare me, but did scare a few other people. We then moved over to Paul's room. Paul was an old janitor or groundskeeper, I believe. There was a place where people would give gifts to Paul, and it was mostly filled with alcohol and cigarettes and the occasional flowers, and it was honestly very nice to look at. So I hope Paul enjoys all of those gifts. We then went into another room with a supposedly haunted mirror, and I did take a picture in this mirror. This picture, I don't know if that's just a trick of the lighting, but I'm very sure that's not something someone on our tour was wearing. So if I'm going to get a paranormal experience out of this, I feel like this picture is what I want to show for it, because I'm at very least, I have a picture that can supposedly have a ghost in it, and that supposedly is basically all I need to be happy. We then went into the billiard room, which, as far as my research knows, Freeland Stanley is also seen fairly often in. It was also a very staticky room, and by staticky, I mean if I had touched anything in that room, it would shock me. I don't know if there's like a physics thing that would explain why it's so staticky, but it was something the tour guide mentioned nonetheless, so I am very inclined to believe that that explanation, if not physics, is some ghosts who are having lots of fun with static. We then entered the final destination of the tour, which was the tunnels, as mentioned before. You might be wondering, why does a hotel have an underground tunnel system? That's weird. I think they're just kind of asking to be haunted at that point. But it actually has a not normal explanation, but it has a explanation. Apparently back in the day, it was impolite for any hotel staff to be seen by guests, which is incredibly weird for it to be impolite, but I digress. There was a tunnel system so employees could move from room to room without wandering the hallways and being possibly seen by a hotel guest. Now, they do know that a death has occurred in the tunnels at some point. It was one of the chefs of the hotel who was walking through the tunnels on a particularly damp and weathered night, and the hotel walls, which are composed of dirt, collapsed on him, and he died. So he is known to wander the tunnels. I went wandering throughout the other lengths of the hotel, and I went up to the 4th floor, which is supposedly the most haunted. It also just seemed like they had changed the wallpaper to be more gray, so it was a much different mood than the rest of the hotel. But I digress, it did make it all the more creepy because I felt very weird wandering through very silent hallways through the night. And I also got to ride on the elevator, which I honestly found really cool. It was really fun to hear about all of the ghosts that wander the hotel, even if I didn't get to see any of them personally. I was also met with the same conundrum that I had before, where I was thinking, all of these stories, they just seem really ordinary, and that is completely expected. I slowly realized that the portrayal of this hotel is much different when you actually experience whatever is there to experience. You are not guaranteed a haunted experience at the Stanley Hotel. And I know this because I didn't have one. I didn't see any ghosts, which is fine, because I think if I would have, I don't know if it would have been too scary of an experience. Sure, we as humans are naturally afraid of the unknown and ghosts and the dark because it's something that we aren't very familiar with. We are naturally afraid of stuff that we aren't familiar with. So we will naturally be afraid of ghosts. But I think it's a misconception to say that ghosts are there to harm or scare you. Throughout all of these stories, it really just seemed like the ghosts were there living their lives. Flora is wandering the concert hall as she did in her life. Freeland is wandering through the entire hotel that he founded. There's a chef who's wandering through the hallways that he did in his life. Paul is still keeping the rules of the hotel because he was very passionate about the rules. It really just seems like the ghosts are no different than all of the people that were wandering around the hotel as a guest or as an employee. They're not really there to scare you or cause you any harm. They're just living in the hotel. I think it should be mentioned at some point throughout all of this that I learned Freeland Stanley originally founded the Stanley Hotel because he would frequently visit Estes Park. And the first time he ever visited Estes Park, it's because he had tuberculosis. And when you have tuberculosis, generally you want to avoid places with a lot of humidity, and you want to be able to get a lot of sunshine. And it did cure his tuberculosis. And there was a quote on the statue of him, which I will read now. "Nature has endowed Estes Park in a wonderful manner. The grandeur of its scenery, its deep blue skies, its clear and cool, invigorating air, its mountain streams of sparkling soft water, its sunny days and delightfully cool nights are the things the summer visitor never forgets, and having enjoyed once, desires to enjoy again." And one would have to assume someone with a very strong connection to this location would not only want to desire it again, but desire it for all eternity, perhaps even after the responsibilities he had in his life are now passed on to other generations. I think a lot of people in the media and TV shows really forget that ghosts are most of the time just spirits of humans. And if this is what they want to do with their time in their afterlife, then so be it. They're just living their lives, or afterlife, so to speak. My dad left early in the morning to go to work, which left me with some time to just collect my thoughts and finally go home. You know, I really couldn't have done any of this without any of the help or support from anyone. I am really just grateful for everyone who has helped me along not only this journey, but other journeys as well. I am also producing a short film currently, Glorious Thing, and there is so much about that I couldn't have done without the help and support and care that everyone takes time to do. And it really encourages me in the fact that it really makes me feel like I can do what I want to do in life. I feel like overall, with any experience I've ever had, even if a large percentage of it is absolutely awful to experience, I still focus on the fact that I had an amazing experience here, whether or not it was contending with my original goal. I think it was also refreshing to actually need help for something like this. As I've been moving on to another era of my life, I've often found myself not asking for help because it feels like I should be responsible. I should be independent, and I should be able to do everything on my own. So sometimes I have to remind myself that life isn't to be lived singularly. So even if I wasn't going on this journey alone and that wasn't my original goal, in all reality, that is completely okay. Because we may all think we should be individuals and have to take on the trials of our lives all on our own. But it's the people, the places, and the things that you love that will help you move through life, and very possibly some time afterwards.